have a slideshow for you guys if you like visuals. Okay, beautiful. All right. So this is a clinic on dressage levels and curriculums. So how do you sort riders into their different levels of dressage? And my name is Felix. I'm currently a leader and instructor of Crystal Pirates. If you have any comments or questions throughout the clinic, you can go ahead and send them in the media chat here, like you have been doing so far. And there will also be some time for questions at the end of the presentation. Yippee! Okay. All right. So the goals for this clinic is looking at how can you organize your riders into different dressage levels within your club or team, and then how do you then move them through those levels using lesson systems and or curriculums, depending on how your club or team is organized, and then how do you keep up with member learning. All right. Okay, so we're going to start with dressage levels. So this is like a quite an important aspect of any well-organized dressage club or team. You can set these up kind of outright at the beginning, even before your club or team becomes public, or it's something that you can develop later on as you get like more experience, or maybe as you have more members, you kind of go, okay, now I really got to start being more organized about this because I have more people to teach. All right, so the first little bit here is think about how would you split up the stages of learning. So ask yourself, what to you makes a beginner? Somebody who's brand new to dressage, what does that mean? And then also consider if you have people who were returning to learning dressage after a long break, maybe they stopped playing SSO for a few months or they just didn't want to do dressage for a bit, would they also be in your beginner group? And then typically you would also have your intermediate group, your advanced group, and then your elite group. So I just want to ask you guys, what do you think makes the difference between, for example, a beginner and an intermediate rider? And then what's the difference between an intermediate and advanced rider? And then is there a meaningful difference between advanced and elite? Because sometimes you do see those two kind of like grouped together, advanced and elite are together. So how would you like kind of quantify those different groups of learners? For me personally, um, when you're thinking about what to teach complete beginners, it's like, what are the fundamentals of dressage? So like the arena, what are the arena lines? So like your wide tier, your quarter line, your eighth line, center line, midline. Those are good reference points to know. Where are the dots? You go click on the rake to turn the dots on. How to use your right mouse button to pan the camera around you, or if you're one of those people using your trackpad, which I am impressed with people who use their trackpads, how to use your trackpad to pan the camera. Um, Basic gaps while writing, explaining the concept of screen delay. Um, and then alignment while in combs. I think a comb is like a beginner skill. And combing at different gaits as well. What's the difference between alignment at the trot, the walk, the canter, the extended canter, things like that. Those are all good like beginner skills to have, because you don't want them to get up to like a higher level of dressage and they don't have like solid fundamentals because then they will kind of flounder. Okay, so Sam says someone who is beginner is still learning, perfecting basic fundamentals moves and might not have basic moves memorized. Intermediate could be someone who has mastered the fundamentals and basic moves, can now start putting them together to do longer, more complex moves. Yeah, those are some great points, Sam. I agree. Uh, the other thing I've seen too with beginners is often they work more with straights, so like straight lines. And then as you get into intermediate, you start to learn, for example, the meter system. So how to write in a circle, how to write on a curved line. You also could get into slant lines because diagonals can be quite tricky to learn. It's a little foreign to the brain if all you've ever done previously is straight lines versus slanted lines. Um, and then, like Sam mentioned, once you get into intermediate, you will start to string several kind of basic moves together to make longer move sets or sequences. Does anybody have any comments about what differentiates intermediate riders from advanced riders? For me personally, the difference between like an intermediate rider who is getting more comfortable, they're quite solid on their basics, is as they become advanced, they have all kind of like the basic moves pretty much memorized. They can pick up new moves easily. You don't have to explain much what needs to happen. They just can kind of listen to the initial description and go, okay, yes, this is what I need to do. This will be the end result. Um, you can also rely on them as like an anchor point or a cornerstone. So, for example, if you're teaching combs to a new group of riders, you can have that advanced rider be the lead rider, so everybody can base their alignment off them. If you're teaching shapes, for example, uh, like moons or like eclipse, you can have that advanced rider lead the line through the shape because you know they're confident and they understand what's going on. But does anybody else have comments on what makes a rider in the advanced category? Okay, yeah, you can definitely use the SSD dictionary as kind of like a reference point. So based on how many moves you know, you're in this category versus that category. Yeah, for sure. And then do you guys think there's a meaningful difference between advanced and elite riders, or they're just kind of the same thing? Elite is just like the fancy way of saying advanced. For me, what I've seen is kind of the distinction is when you get into like the elite category, uh, those are the riders that um, will have suggestions. Like, for example, if you're working on a routine together, they're the ones that will pipe up with ideas of like, oh, like we just did this move, but maybe we could do it this way. Or they're like open to like more experimental concepts, um, like things that are not like standard quote unquote. Um, so like one thing we do in Crystal Pirates is our highest level of dressage is our boatswains, and that's all experimental. So we do things like slant slopes, which is slants that are not at a 45-degree angle. They're all other degrees. We do not circle pinwheels. We do like box pinwheels, oval pinwheels, diamond pinwheels. So like stuff that's not standard, quote unquote. And I think being open to that sort of thing kind of puts you in the elite category. All right. I'm just seeing Anzia wrote beginner intermediate for me is mostly do they know basic moves, identify foundation, and basics like good timing transitions. Inter should know slants. Yes, it's good to be solid with slants before moving on. Advanced versus elite is really memorization of every move. Okay, so to you, elite is kind of having that memory bank of moves, and then advanced is just being able to understand those new concepts. Elite riders should also be nearly perfect when executing moves and very confident. Okay, and then Leo says the difference is elite riders understand things on a deeper level, can more confidently perform dressage-related things like shapes and different lines. Okay, yeah, those are all great points. All right, so those are some things you could consider. Everybody's brought some great points here of how you would kind of like quantify what are the different levels of dressage, how would you build lesson plans, or if you're doing a curriculum around each level, um, so that you can progress your members through those stages. Okay, so then the next thing you want to think about is how do you kind of judge the level of dressage when new members join? Do you have everybody start as beginners? So no matter their previous level, they're going to start as beginners. Even if they were an elite rider in a previous club or team, now that they're joining your club or team, they start as a beginner. So that has pros and cons. What are some examples of pros for this or cons for this that you guys can think of having everyone start as beginners? I can see several people are typing. We have opinions on this topic. um, I'll say that one pro of having everybody start as beginners is that they learn from the ground up your club or team's specific dressage method or dictionary, and they kind of learn your style of commanding from starting with the beginner concepts as you kind of have defined them. That's one potential pro. I'm curious to see what else you guys say. A potential con is this could be frustrating for more experienced riders. So if they've been doing dressage for years and they're like, I know everything, I don't want to start as a beginner. They don't want to go back to basics. So that could be a potential pain point. You could handle this in different ways as well. I'm just curious to see what you guys think. I'll let you guys type. I will say too, from personal experience, if you have people start as beginners and they can't just kind of speed run through your curriculum or like the way you organize your lessons, if people feel like they achieve the highest level too quickly, they might they might think it was too easy and they might not stay, if that makes sense. So kind of like requiring them to progress through the levels at a more measured pace can make them feel like, hey, yeah, I did work, put in the work, I did learn things the way that this clever team likes to do it. Okay, so Ren says a small test. Yeah, that's another option. You could do a test. Ask what level they think they are. Um, have them do moves for the level they think they are, just to give you a better idea. Yeah, yeah. And then you're saying that as an intermediate rider, if you were put into beginner lessons, I would get bored very easily. I think that's interesting. For myself, even though I feel like I know a good amount about dressage, I will still go to beginner lessons in Crystal Pirates. So that's our deckhands, and I will ride with our complete beginners. And to me, that's an opportunity to practice the basics, the fundamentals, like more in depth, if that makes sense. So I will really like focus more on my gaps and my alignment. It also gives me a chance to think about, I can see that this person, like I won't backseat instruct, but I will see like this writer, for example, needs a little bit more help on timing. So if I teach a beginner lesson in the future and that writer is there, I know, for example, I'll keep a closer eye on them for timing and I will remind them or give them like positive reinforcement, like, hey, when we're doing like, for example, gated curls, when your saddle is straight, change your gait, that kind of thing, or make sure to go on go. So I feel like being open to going to lessons that are below your level, quote unquote, gives you the chance to kind of like refresh those basic skills. Finn says, I always ask them what level they think they are based on previous experience, but I do like to put them with beginners first to get used to my system. Unless, of course, they have, for example, written multiple competitions, something like that. Okay, that's a good way to do it then. Um, I'm curious though for you, if you have people who join who have written multiple competitions before and they don't have to start as beginners, do you see a bit of friction with them? Like, for example, if you're having them ride in a routine that you choreograph, do they have enough time to get used to your commanding style, or are they still kind of stuck on the commanding style from other clubs or teams they've been in? Sam says, I feel doing that can really turn someone away from the club and participating. Okay, so you're saying if you have everybody start as beginners? Uh, I would say quiz them from a specific dictionary at the level they say they are. And if they do great, then maybe keep them there. If they need some more assistance and fundamental knowledge, slowly move your way down the levels to find a suitable level for them, where they are still engaged with learning how to perform correctly. Okay, yeah, that's also a good way to do it. Kind of assess them where they are at. I think it also depends too on like how different your method or your dictionary is from SSD. I think most people use SSD as the standard, but one example I can think of is bronze butterflies. The SDM is quite different from SSD in how they teach, so you couldn't necessarily just jump in, to example, to bronze butterflies because you would not be familiar with their method at all. You would have to start as a beginner in that case. Okay, so Ren said you'd like to progress while also practicing the previous levels, like when instructors don't focus on one level but multiple just for practice. So do you mean like within one practice there are moves or concepts from several different levels of dressage? Because that may, yeah, you could potentially do that. So like for example, if you had a lesson focused on keyholes, you could start from the beginner perspective. What is the keyhole? What are the components that make up a keyhole? You would also probably have to talk about combs if your beginners have never learned combs before. And then from there, you could integrate intermediate moves that use keyholes, advanced moves that use keyholes, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that would depend on who's at the lesson. Because if you have like some complete beginners to dressage, you might have to just stick to the basics. Otherwise, it will get frustrating for them. The pace of learning will be too fast, if that makes sense. So in that case, it would be good to like ask your more advanced riders, be here to support the babies, the complete beginners. You're here to, so they have more people in line to ride with. You're here to kind of offer them positive reinforcement. Like if they do a good job, like it's nice to see people hand top, like, hey, Felix, you did great on that keyhole. Well done, stuff like that. Anzia says, like having them start as beginners to learn about each other, see their attitude and what is in their foundation. If you had someone join your team and they were upset about doing beginner for a little bit, that might kind of affect how you see them as being a good fit if they're not open to covering basics again. Yeah, that's a good point. Dapple says, I feel like they should start as beginners just to learn the club team's way of commanding, fundamentals of the club team, and then do a test. Yeah, that's also a good way to do it. Leo. So Leo is doing very organized. Pros, everyone starts at the same level, which is positive. You don't need to create multiple lessons or a big schedule. You can also teach your own dressage-related methods to everyone at the same time, and their past experience might not align with your method. That's a good point, because some people have very unique commanding styles, or the club team has a unique dictionary that maybe doesn't use the same ways to describe moves or even the same names. Con, it can become repetitive, they won't be challenged. Yeah, that's a good point. Depending too on your specific riders, if you do have them all start as beginners, if you see that someone is already quite experienced, they're picking up your method slash dictionary quite quickly, you could get them up to maybe the testing point if you do use tests more quickly than the complete beginners, and then they can take the test and progress on. But also too, it depends on how many instructors you have. Do you have the time to lead uh, practices for several different levels per week, for example? Depends on how much time you have each week. Yeah, a trial week is super helpful. I agree, Sam. And it's not just they're in a trial. The club or team is also in a trial for them, if that makes sense. So you're both assessing each other. All right, those are all great points. Okay, awesome. And then the second thing, we've already kind of talked about it, but using a dressage test. So you guys already gave some good points there. Um, I think one of the good things about using a dressage test is if, for example, you want people to at least be intermediate level before they join. So part of them applying is knowing, hey, you're going to do a dressage test as part of the application process, or during your trial period, you'll do a dressage test. And then from there, you can kind of see, okay, are they really intermediate, like they said in their application? Or maybe they're a beginner, but they're very promising. I will take them on and kind of get them up to speed. Or no, they have no idea what they're talking about. They need to learn a little bit more before they reapply. um, and then uh, one of the cons I will say about using tests is it might require more of your time to hold those tests and to score them. And then some members might not apply, potential members, because they have test anxiety. So they're like, oh my God, I can't do tests. This is so scary. So they won't even apply. So some things to consider. But if you guys have other points about tests, feel free to type them out. Yeah, so Ren said, my club is exclusively for intro to advanced. We want to progress all at the same level. That makes sense. You want to kind of have your group kind of on the same page. I can see that. Dapple says, the only thing I've never really liked about dressage tests is that they take so much time. Testing can be very stressful to some. I always worried that I would forget something during a test. Yes, those are good points. In Crystal Pirates, we have recently started doing tests, and I'm one of the people that scores them, and it does take time to score as the instructor because we want to give good feedback so they can improve if they need to retake. Um, I will say too, if you're not using the test as part of the joining process, but to rank up, doing test review before and kind of like really emphasizing like the core moves and concepts you want them to be solid on. And then if they do need to retake the test after, do like review after so that they understand like, hey, during the test, for example, these are the little things that you made mistakes on. We're going to review them like pretty thoroughly, and then they feel more confident when they retake the test. I will say too, what I like about tests is it's it's another kind of speed bump for people who want to speed run the levels of dressage in your club. They must take the test. So if they weren't really paying attention during the lessons for that level, or they're kind of still stuck on maybe the commanding style or the methods from their previous clubs or teams, this is kind of like a speed bump. They get stopped there and they realize, oh, I really have to focus and learn how this club or team does things. Otherwise, I won't pass the test. So yeah, it's a way for them to kind of really commit to your club or team style dressage, if that makes sense. Another thing, Dapples, is if you feel like you have bad test anxiety, which I know a lot of people do, is you can also have like an open book policy when you give tests. So they're allowed to have their notes with them because I find that helps a lot of people if they do get quite anxious, if they have their little dressage notes in front of them. It's like a little safety blanket and they're not as scared. Bren says, I tried to get more instructors for different levels. It ended in disaster. Oh, lots of people left your club. Oh no. Yeah, that can be hard. I will say, when you bring new instructors on, Um, it's really important to gauge their personality. Does their style of commanding fit with your club's or team's overall style of commanding? You really want to take your time too with kind of like vetting them and certifying them. So one thing we do in Crystal Pirates, as an example, is we don't hire outside instructors. It's only our current members that can apply to instruct. And they fill out an application form, and then they go through a certification process, which is where they teach the lessons in the curriculum to the staff members, so like the current HRs and the current instructors. And while they're teaching us, we take detailed notes and we give them feedback after they teach. So, for example, if they teach the staff for like about 45 minutes, we give them 15 to 20 minutes of feedback, of detailed feedback. So, like, for example, some of the common things we've mentioned to new instructors is, hey, like, I can tell you're a little nervous. That's totally fine. You'll get more used to speaking in front of a group as you progress, so don't worry about that. Another thing too is like the cadence of how they call moves, because when you first start instructing, you may tend to call moves really quickly. So it's like, especially with your beginners, you need to slow down. You want to say like move, set, pre, go. Maybe say that twice or three times to really give your beginner riders time to think about what they're doing. We also encourage them to think about different ways that they can teach a move or concept. So not just explaining it out loud, but can you type out the steps in the SSO chat or the Discord chat? Are there diagrams that you can show to your riders? Can you demonstrate or have a stronger rider demonstrate? Can you have your members practice the move on their own before having them pop back into line and the whole group works together? Can you show your screen so you show them how the screen delay looks to you, for example, if they're having trouble understanding screen delay? Little things like that. So like the more kind of like feedback you can give them right after they teach the staff, the more they can kind of take that on and kind of go, okay, for when I do teach the members, this is what I want to keep in mind. You can also have them shadow more senior instructors. So like they'll go to the practice and they'll like sit in the stands and they'll take notes. So for example, like if I went to toilet, as known on Crystal Pirates, if I was learning, I went to toilet practice that she was leading, I'll be in the stands taking notes. Okay, toilet, explain keyhole this way. I thought that was really good. And then this person had trouble understanding combs, but then toilet like showed them this diagram, for example. So that's another way. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. Sam says this isn't about test directly, overarching thing to think about, tricky to balance new members' needs and wants, and what you think will be best for their success and the club's success. Yes, that is a very good point. So like, you definitely want to be flexible with that. Um, so like, how can you offer some members extra support? Um, can you tweak things here and there if you see like this this test is maybe too hard? Maybe we need to like make it a little bit more um, like not as complex. Or do we need to spend more time reviewing this specific concept before we have this group test? How many instructors are available for private lessons, for example, if people do need that before taking the test? Those are some great points, Sam. Summer says, I'm in a team that does tests. Our system is that you have to complete the first test before being able to pass your trial. And then after that, next tests are optional and on your own time. We get rewards and such for tests and rank up based on them. For me and other members, we really like the system because it gave us something to work towards, and we also got benefits for completing them. I finished all of them pretty quickly despite the cooldown and wish I could take more now. It was also a good time to bond with the instructor during the test, and I enjoy that part of it now that I'm the one instructing said tests. That's a really interesting point, Summer. I appreciate that perspective. So yeah, you might have some people who love studying for tests, who enjoy the testing process. So that's like a really good framework for them. One of my friends is in a club that also uses a testing system, and she also really enjoys taking the tests. So now she's done all of them, so she's done. But I would get like updates from her in DM. She'd be like, "Hey, like I just took like this test for this rank, and now I need to wait like a week and a half before I can take the next one. But I'm so ready." So you do have some people sometimes who really love the testing process. Yeah, it's interesting how people differ that way. All right, okay, those are all some great points. Let's go on to the next. Okay, so lesson systems and curriculums. All right, so this is thinking about how do you want your members to progress through the different levels of dressage. We already talked a bit about, are they learning a specific method or dictionary that is unique to your club or team? Do you want them to go through lessons in a specific order? Or can they go through them in any order? As long as they complete, for example, all your beginner lessons, that's fine. They don't need to start with lesson 1 and end with lesson 5, for example, they can do them in any order. And then what core concepts do they need to know before moving on to the next level? And we kind of talked about this earlier too, like what is the difference between a beginner rider versus an intermediate versus advanced? Beginners being kind of like your fundamentals, your basics. Intermediate is where you start to chain together the pieces you learned in beginner. And then advanced is like learning even more complex boost sets or sequences. And then elite, if you do use elite as a term, is more experimental or like more fluid understanding of dressage, becoming more creative. Uh, Often these are the people that you might consider to be instructors if you want more instructors, or they're the people during routines that are interested in providing feedback on choreography. They have good ideas that they kind of throw out there. Um, so I'm just curious for you guys, in your club or team, do you prefer that your members go through lessons in a certain order? Is your style of lessons or your curriculum more fluid? Like they can, for example, these are the intermediate lessons. They can learn them in any order, like whichever ones they happen to go to, or do they need to catch up with private lessons later on, for example, if they're behind the group? Do you guys have a preference there? I'm also curious too. Do you guys use a curriculum? So it's like uh, set number of concepts and moves that people learn per level of dressage, or is it more fluid? Like today, I'm teaching a lesson about circles, for example. This lesson is for complete beginners to circles all the way to advanced riders. So we're going to start with the very, very basics of circles, and we're going to work our way up to more, advanced concepts. Um, or do you like chain lessons in a certain order? So, like for example, in this lesson, we learned about our basic slants. In the next lesson, we learn about how do you put two slant moves together? How do you put a slant and a straight move together? All right. And then maybe your third lesson is we're going to do slants, but in a circle. So they need to learn those 3 lessons in order. Otherwise, the last lesson on slants in the circle will not make sense because they didn't learn the previous 2, if that makes sense. Or is it like, what's another option? You kind of like pick the lesson you're going to teach that day based on who shows up. So if you're like, oh, the writers that showed up today that are able to attend, or that they answered yes to when I sent out the practice reminder, this group overall, they're quite familiar with slants. There's like maybe 2 people that are a little not as confident. So we're going to do a bit of review for those 2 people, and then we'll get into like the bulk of the lesson. Just curious what your guys' preferences. I know everybody has kind of like their own little way of organizing their lessons or using lesson plans or not, or following a curriculum or not. How structured is your learning system? Seeing some people tippy tapping away. I'll just yap a little while you guys are typing. Um, so another thing you can think about too is when you're considering how you want your members to progress, is what are the options available to members for learning dressage in your club or team. So I think the one that's most common is scheduled practices. Every week you put out a schedule saying, hey, we're going to have beginner lesson on this day, intermediate on this day, and advanced on this day, for example. And then those are the scheduled practices available. Generally, when you're a small club or team, often as the owner slash co-owner, you might be the only one instructing. It's a question of managing your time. How much can you do per week without getting burnt out? But if you have more instructors available, you can offer private lessons. So for example, if somebody was totally swamped with homework or life stuff that past week and they're behind in relation to their group, they can schedule a private lesson with an instructor and kind of go over the concepts one-on-one. I will say though that private lessons are great, but there are some concepts that you really need a group to understand well. So it's a little tricky to teach comb alignment, for example, with just you and the instructor. It is nice to have the rest of the group there to work with. Circles as well. I mean, you can kind of teach the different circle sizes and some circle moves, but if you want to learn about gaps in a circle or being aligned across from your partner in a circle, it is nice to have more people there. People who are tippy tapping stopped. Okay. The thoughts are no longer needed, I suppose. Just one last question on this slide for you guys is having to do with the final option I have listed here for your members to learn dressage is competitive or non-competitive routine, so just routines in general. And I was just curious what you guys think about what are the differences between learning dressage in practices versus routines? Like how does the learning differ? So when you're going to practice, what is the focus of your learning? And then when you're doing routines, how does the focus change? Do you guys think there are differences there or they're pretty similar? Um, just curious as to your thoughts. If you have uh, written in a routine previously or if you choreographed a routine previously, um, what do you think are the kind of like the differences in the ways that people learn dressage between those two? This is kind of like more conceptual of a question too, so no worries if we don't have thoughts. From what I've seen, practices are really about learning kind of like the core concepts, the building blocks as we've discussed earlier, and then routines is about putting those things together in interesting ways. So like one example is we're doing Echoes of Tomorrow, a routine right now, and part of that is making diamonds and triangle shapes. We previously haven't done triangles in practice. We have done diamonds in boatswains, which is our advanced elite/elite riders, but not triangles. So they've never done triangles before, but we did triangles in the routine. So that's something brand new. Also, too, a lot of times in practices, you are riding in a line or you're riding in split lines. You're riding as a group generally, whereas with routines, often you're making shapes in the arena, you're having riders split away from each other and come back together. You're doing lots of moves rapidly, one after the other. So I would say with practices, even if you don't have the moves memorized, as long as you're listening to the instructor explain, you can still do a good job of performing them. But with routines, it's a lot more about memorizing and uh, thinking of the move with the move set. So, for example, like Wilma said, their first move in our routine for Echoes of Tomorrow is chicken butt set. That doesn't really mean anything, but the riders know that on the first go, these riders do this. On the second go, these riders do this. And on the third go, these riders do this. So it's a lot more memorization with routines, I find. Just curious if you guys have any comments about the difference between learning dressage in practice compared to routines. For some reason, too, when I see people typing, like I see their name, little dots, I think of like keyboard cat, like do 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 do, like typing on his little piano, I guess. Not necessarily typing, but same vibes. I think too, what's interesting is um, when you're teaching routines, or if you're running the routine, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, if you have experience, is that if you have, for example, some more junior members of your clubber team who have signed up as alternate riders, how does their learning contrast with the learning of your more experienced members? So one example I can think of is with Echoes of Tomorrow. In part of the routine, we ride in a three buddy, or in the SSC dictionary, it's called a tight rein. But instead of with two riders, it's three riders riding together in the tight rein. I was explaining it, and I was like, yeah, we're gonna do a three buddy here. All our boaters and our cadets knew what I was talking about, but we have some deckhands who have signed up as alternates, and they're like, Felix, what the heck is a three buddy? So then it's like, okay, we had to do like a little mini lesson inside the routine practice for them to learn what a three buddy was. So I think too, it's also an interesting way to kind of uh, remind myself as an instructor, kind of like all the unique ways we describe dressage within Crystal Pirates, and kind of maybe new concepts that people haven't encountered before, and then how do you kind of like teach that little unique concept on the spot so that they can understand what they need to do in the next section of the routine. I know I yapped a lot there. If you guys have any comments, feel free to make them, but I'll go on to the next slide. Okay. So the next thing is keeping up with member learning. So how do we keep track of where each member is in their dressage learning journey? All right. So the big thing here is attendance sheets. So I would say these are really good to kind of think about if you're first starting up your club or team, or if it's relatively new, you just have your first few members in. This can be a Google Sheet. It can be a dedicated channel or a set of channels in your closed server or your staff server. You can not only use this to track attendance, so like for example, if you have an attendance requirement of 2 practices per week or more, maybe when you're learning a competition routine, you can keep track of how many people are showing up, but also you can also track what stage each member is at with their learning. So for example, if they do need to learn this set amount of lessons before they can rank up or before they're eligible to test. You can keep track in the spreadsheet or those channels and say like, hey, for example, Felix has done lessons 1 through 3 of our beginner lessons. So now they are ready to learn lesson 4. Or you can even leave other little notes for your instructors. So for example, uh, Felix is having a little bit of trouble understanding screen delay. We should maybe encourage them to book a private lesson, or whoever is instructing our beginners next time, spend a little bit more time talking about screen delay. Or keep an eye on Felix. Make sure they're going on Go, or uh, they're understanding how screen delay affects alignment in a comb, for example. So you can leave little notes to the other instructors about the little extra things writers need help with. Okay, so that's attendance sheets. You can also think about pace of learning. So we kind of discussed this a bit earlier. Do you want each trial batch to move through the material together? Or do you allow some people to speed run through? If they're more experienced, can they kind of like really go through the lessons quickly, take the test, move up if you use testing? Um, if you do have some members who are behind, can they catch up with private lessons? Also, on the flip side, can they move ahead with private lessons? And then maybe you kind of think about, okay, if we're doing moves that don't require a partner or that don't need you to look for alignment in a comb, for example, or in a slant, then those are moves that they can catch up with private lessons or move ahead with private lessons. But for example, if you have a whole lesson on revolves, they probably need to go to the lesson with the group. That's a bit trickier to teach one-on-one with an instructor. So that's pace of learning. If you guys have any comments about any of that, feel free to send them. And then the last thing here is thinking about when is a member ready to rank up to the next level of learning. So is it when they feel ready? Is it up to them to approach a staff member or an instructor and say, hey, I'm ready to rank up, or I'm ready to take the test? Uh, is there like a channel where they can submit that request, or do they go through DMs? Or is it something as an instructing team you go, okay, looking at our attendance system, we can see that, just talking about myself again, Felix has completed all the beginner lessons and they've done the review lessons. They are now ready to test or eligible to test. So we are going to get in touch with them and say, hey, like you've completed all these things. You are ready or eligible to test. Would you like to? And then maybe talking about myself, Felix replies and goes, actually, no, I would like to review more. And then you can kind of go, okay, they would like more review. Or maybe they go, yes, I would like to test. And then you can go about scheduling that test for them. I've also seen too, this is more with bigger clubs, they'll have set dates for tests, especially if they do group tests. So you just have to wait for the group tests that month. You can't schedule it on your own time, for example. Um, Other things you want to think about here is in terms of when they are ready, is what lessons or sections of the curriculum do they need to complete with regards to their current level? Um, what happens if they need to redo a lesson? So how do you communicate that to them? For example, if they really struggled or they had to leave halfway through, um, how would you communicate to that to them? Say like, hey, like you took this lesson, that's great, but you need to spend more time with these moves or these concepts before you would be eligible to rank up or to test. And then we've talked about tests already, but using tests is one way to kind of gauge, are they ready to rank up to the next level? And then finally, what happens if a member needs to be ranked down? So maybe you had a member who was super keen when they first joined. They kind of speed ran your beginner, maybe even your intermediate lessons or curriculum, and then maybe they get really busy and they can't come to as many practices, or you kind of see their quality of writing has gone down. Do they need to go back down one rank and kind of redo the core concepts and moves from that rank before they get to move up again? What are the parameters for that? So yes, do we have any questions or comments about any of that? Or like, what is your club or team's preferred way of tracking or keeping up with member learning? I will say too, just like continuing on the theme of what happens if a member needs to be ranked down, that could be a hard thing to do as like a staff member or instructor, but sometimes you do need to do it because it can be frustrating for the other riders in that rank if this one person gets to stay, for example, in the advanced group, but they're not meeting the attendance requirement or they're performing poorly during practices, like um, they're kind of like dragging the rest of the group down, if that makes sense. So how do you approach that diplomatically so that the person that does need to be ranked down doesn't get their feelings hurt, but you also need to like keep the whole vibe of the group up. You can't make things painful for everyone if one person is not doing well, like consistently, if that makes sense, and they would benefit from going back down a rank. Ah, several people are typing. People have thoughts. Yay! And then I think too, somebody mentioned previously that just like how having, if you do have all your writers started as beginners, it's a good way to gauge if they have like the patience or the humility to start again from the beginning. Maybe that makes them a better fit for your team. Uh, Having to proceed with the rank down process can also give you a good idea. If you talk to the member and they're like, oh yeah, I understand. I haven't been at the top of my game. I do need to go back down to the intermediate level and kind of like relearn these things so that um, I'm not kind of holding, the other peeps back. Oh, I just scrolled down. I realized I didn't scroll and you guys had left comments. Oh, Felix, you're fired. Okay, just reading quickly. Ren says we have no curriculum, which I am now realizing is the reason my club member levels are messed up. Curriculums are really great for ensuring that your members are learning all the same material before they rank up. Uh, you don't necessarily have to teach them in a certain order. I find that once you get past your beginners, your intermediates, they can learn out of order. Same with your advanced writers. Once they have those core fundamentals and basics down and they learn your style of commanding, after that they can kind of learn out of order. But with your beginners, generally you want them to learn in order because they build on each other. Um, Anzia said, depends on the person in terms of private lessons. Um, if a member is more knowledgeable or they learn quickly, they might just need to do a quick review. That's a good point. You do have some people who are quite strong in dressage and they don't need as much kind of one-on-one time. Changes depending on who was at a previous lesson or missed a week. Always good to know how to improvise. Yes, those are good points. I would say too, if you have like a curriculum or like a set of lessons, you can kind of go, okay, I could see that, for example, my beginners the combs were kind of really tough for this group. So we're going to slow this down. Instead of doing the lesson in 1 hour, we're going to spread it over 2 lessons. So we'll take a full 2 hours to really get into the nitty gritty of combs and screen delay and alignment. Maybe we play different comb games, that's kind of stuff. Okay, Leo is saying in PQL, we have different rank practices based on the ranks we're in the club. You join as a princess, learn all about the PDM for 3 weeks, and then if you pass trial, you become queen and keep attending queen routines. I'm guessing that's routine and practices, but we usually have a princess practice once a week that goes over the basics again. Highest ranked have legacy practice, which is where you do a more complex routine. No, that's a really interesting, Leo. So you're kind of saying those 3 week trials kind of like it's like a boot camp. You learn PQL's method and their style of commanding, and then you're kind of ready to hop in to the other lessons or learning routines. That's cool. Um, Ren says, I have never done a routine or made one. I would like to learn how to. Uh, Lesson is probably better for learning, and a routine could be good for memorizing. Um, I will say though, Ren, as you get more comfortable with choreography, the first routine I choreographed, it was very much the moves that we learned in practice, and we just put them together in strings for the routine. As I've become more experienced with choreo, the moves that we do in the routine really, some of them do exist in practice, but some of them do not. So I think routines really allow you to exercise that more kind of experimental, conceptual, artistic side of your brain as an instructor, and can be very fun for your riders too, because it's kind of like pushing the boundaries of dressage, if that makes sense. It is really good to have your basics and your fundamentals down really well. So like understanding of gaps, of screen delay, of alignment, of how things work at different gates. How are things perceived from the overhead camera versus when you're riding in the arena? But really, routines allow you to be very out of the box. What is dressage? Like, what does it mean? How, yeah, you get to be really creative. Um, but then you say, I have a question. When I instruct dressage, I always put in brackets what the move is. Orbit, set, walk, curl, canter, curl. Um, I think it's good to type in the chat or the SSO chat, or if you have, for example, your lesson or curriculum available for your writers to see in your closed server, because some people are more auditory listeners, so they learn by listening. Some people are more visual, they like to see it in the chat or they like to see diagrams, and some people are more kinetic learners. They need to do the thing. So that's where demonstrations are really good, or for example, they follow someone through the move. So what I find helpful is to really reinforce the learning and not them just passively listening or passively reading, is to ask questions while you're teaching. So for example, if we are learning combs, and we start off with a trot comb because that's kind of the basic comb. And previously, before we did combs, we talked about screen delay and how that affects gaps in alignment. We learned the trot comb. I would have the line halt, and I would say, okay, if we did a walk comb, what would happen? Would our alignment stay the same or would it be different? So now you're having them think about what the answer would be without you providing it straight away, if that makes sense. Okay. And then Dapple says, in my club, usually have 1 to 2 lessons per week, depending on what is being taught, for members to learn something new. Practices are used as a way to practice what was learned, to try them in different scenarios. Yes. And then Bren says, I would allow learners to catch up but not go ahead. Yeah. I mean, that's a fair way to structure it. You could also go case by case basis, like you mentioned previously. If you have someone who's really a keen learner, they learn on their own time, maybe they have a lot of experience, then potentially maybe you would let them get ahead. But, case by case basis. Oh, Elle says it's really hard for me to tell someone that they need to get ranked down. Yeah, I feel you. But sometimes you do kind of have to be tough like that because similar to like if you have a member who is really not meeting attendance and they're not communicating with staff that they need a break or whatever, it drags down the rest of the members because they're like, why does this person still get to be in the club? I never see them. Sometimes you do have to be the bad guy. Or not the bad guy, but like the teacher who, gives them a stern but loving, talking to. um, Ren says if a member is struggling at a certain level, probably ask them to attend private lessons before or after the regular lessons until they're on the same level. Yep, that's another good option is try to get them up to speed. And then maybe if they still can't get there after a certain period of time, you go, okay, you really do need to rank down. And then Leo says, PQL evaluates any practice and takes notes if they feel like a member is ready to rank up and meets the requirements. And then we do a Google form test to see if they know what they need of the PDM for said rank. And then if they pass, they rank up on the first month. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Always interesting to see how each club or team manages kind of like these systems. Okay. I realize we're over the hour. Too much yapping. Okay. So final chance for questions or comments. Please go ahead and send them in the chat. Or if you think of some questions later on, feel free to send them to me in DMs. Or if you have any suggestions for like future clinics you'd like to see about instructing or another topic, you can send those to me as well. How would you recommend keeping track of members' progress? My club has 3 instructors. Find it very important that everyone's on the same page. So I would say Dragon, depending on how your club structures your lessons or curriculums, like maybe they're numbered or they have a certain title or whatever. If you use a Google Sheet or like channels in in the staff section of your server or your staff server, you could keep track there. So for example, with Crystal Pirates, we have a Google Sheet, and then one section for each member is where they are with lessons. So we have a column for beginner, intermediate, advanced. And then in each column is like, for example, if they're still a beginner, there would nothing be in an intermediate advanced, but on the beginner column, it would say like, for example, they have completed lesson 2. So they still need to do lessons 3 and 4 before they can sign up for the test. But if you have less kind of like a structured set of lessons or curriculums, you could, like for example, like have like a channel where every time an instructor hosts, they kind of do a little summary of what the lesson was about, and then maybe elsewhere you could have for like member learning, you could say like maybe like core concepts they need to know. For example, like combs, circles, slants, maybe are some categories, and you could like write notes in each little box saying this member is, solid on circles. They can move on from this. Or they need to learn a little bit more about slants. Kind of depends on how your lesson and your curriculum is structured, if that makes sense. But also too, like with Crystal Pirates, we have a little section in the staff server that's like member profiles. So like for example, using myself again, Felix really likes personalized feedback. So when Felix is at a lesson and you see that she's doing a good job, make sure to let her know. Um, and then you could say, for example, oh, I'm going to make up a name. Kermit uh, really likes diagrams. So if Kermit is at a lesson, make sure you have some diagrams to help him along with things that he's struggling with a bit, if that makes sense. Yeah. So you can kind of like have little notes for your fellow instructors. You guys can kind of give each other heads up on who needs a little bit of extra, encouragement, who really likes personalized feedback. Okay, if we have no further questions, we'll end the clinic here. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming. You guys were a great audience. Lots of great comments and questions. It's always super interesting to learn how everybody organizes dressage because it's so. There are many ways you can do it. My words are not wording. There are many avenues you can go down. You can be so creative. Even if most of us start out with SSD as kind of like basis of our learning, everybody kind of branches away from that, develops their own unique way of structuring their dictionary or their curriculum or how they command. So I think that's really fun. I personally love going to lessons hosted by instructors outside of my club because I'm like, wow, like that was a really great way to teach this thing, or I love like how they explain this, or wow, I've never heard this move described this way. So yeah, it's always really cool, especially if you speak another language. So I speak French, so sometimes I go to l'Association Française de Dressage, which is run by Odd. So stuff in French, because the way they describe stuff, completely different, of course, it's in a different language. So that's fun. Highly recommend if you speak another language. Um, I can't be in the arena because I don't have a French account, but I love listening to the way they talk about stuff. the little random French Canadian in the chat. Cool. All right. Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and I will send all those links and things shortly. Again, feel free to DM me if you have any questions, comments, all that good stuff. All right. Goodbye. I'm waving at my screen. Goodbye. Thank you so much for coming.